the internet today, you'll find a plethora of websites, including blogs and op-ed pieces from specialty organizations from around the world, which warn of an imminent takeover of Siberia by China. These suggestions go back some time, however, back to the coming war between Russia and China by Harrison Salisbury. You've got the Tom Clancy novels, Taipei Times editorials, European Dialogue website, Pat Buchanan's Apocalyptic Predictions, that's proliferating. Writers such as Vadim Volovoy at the International Center for Geopolitical Studies do not make up this approach, however. You've got one range, and there's the serious range. She has plenty of support from the Moscow-based Institute for Political and Military Analysis, and even members of the Russian government. And some of the quotes and statements that have been made by other speakers today. An observer has to ask, what are the elements presenting the greatest danger for stability in the region that supports such a growing chorus? There are a number of issues ranging from exponential Chinese economic growth, concomitant hunger for raw materials, the serious disproportionate demographic issues on both sides of the border, I might point out, grossly disproportionate development in the region, failure of the Russian government to invest in Siberian infrastructure, geographical remoteness, and a Russian petrostate are all issues raised by those concerned about the future of the region. The issue matters to all in the world, as missteps can have consequences that reverberate around the world, again, as we. However, these countries are not just meeting in a time of rapid travel. Here's the history coming up, folks. They've had centuries of contact and relationships, years to work out these relationships. In Soviet and Tsarist times, Russia and China had the longest border in the world. That border is 2,605 miles long, or less than half the U.S.-Canadian borders, including the one with Alaska. According to a wide range of observers, proximity presents this danger to Siberia and to Russia. Along with many dangers, it has resulted in trade. It certainly resulted in the longest formal relationship that China has had with the European state. In addition to and in sync with having the longest borders, Russia and China have the longest history of treaties. As early as 1689, the Treaty of Brest began the process of border delimitation that extends to this time. This is the first treaty that China wrote with a European country, I might point out. Between 1689 and 1914, 7 major treaties addressed the location of sections of that border. In addition to political geography, those treaties established commerce, and especially increasing rights for Russian merchants in China. The 17th and 18th century treaties reflected the power of the Chinese Empire. The situation reversed in the 19th and 20th centuries. From the mid-19th century, treaties arising from Governor General Murabov-Morsky's, that's your key here, annexation of what would be in the Russian Far East, through Sino-Soviet agreements in the 1920s, the Russians had the greatest leverage. In these treaties, the Russian Empire inexorably increased their territory, including building a railroad, what they call the Far Eastern Railroad, across Manchuria. And again, trading rights for Russian merchants against the wishes of the Chinese Empire and then the nationalist Chinese government. In the Soviet period, the border issues were settled with military action at times. In 1929, the Sino-Soviet conflict began with the Chinese warlord trying to take that Manchurian Railroad back, which the Soviets clarified was theirs. Japanese took it, finally went back to China in the 1950s. In the 1969 Sino-Soviet border war on the Missouri River, again, previously mentioned, it resulted in showcasing the split between the Soviets and the Chinese to the world. The underlying issue, however, predates that communist era again, a holdover from Nicholas Muravlov's annexation of the region that is now called the Russian Far East. And they were fighting over islands in the river at that point. Back to this here in the aughts. Things changed beginning in the late 20th century. The Soviet Union and Communist China returned to the subject again, beginning under Gorbachev in the 1980s. The Soviet Union apologized for the imperialist actions of the Russian Empire. The Chinese government agreed that, well, you're sorry, we're nice, you're sorry, we're thankful for that. It's it's all over. That's all right. The 2004 complementary agreement officially divided some more islands. So what has happened since the end of the Soviet Union is there are negotiations beginning again. And this turnover of islands was completed by 2008. The Chinese moved in. It does appear, despite the claim that, oh, it's all over, as it was made in 2008, I'm sorry, in the 1980s, it does appear that it's not over yet. For the latest on this issue, you actually might want to see Mark Galeotti's recent article on Sino-Russian border resolution. Has just come out, a book edited by Bruce Elman, Beijing's Power and China's Borders, 20 Neighbors in Asia, for those interested in that topic. Many of these issues in Sino-Soviet Russian relations would be expected. Even the raw materials Russia selling to Chinese, however, are of a greater variety than you expect. The next issue, of course, being trade. And these may be the deal breakers. So what are the natural resources? They've been hinted at today, and these are the big ones. And perhaps the last, which has not been mentioned at all, may be exceptionally important, and that is an issue. In the last quarter of the 19th century, back in Imperial Russia, the full realization of the great resources under the ground available in Siberia became clear. And at that point, the consideration was, oh, Siberia is going to finance the Russian Empire in the very last decade of the Russian Empire. It wasn't the first time this would have happened, because in the 17th century, Siberia funded Tsarist Russian government to a tune of about 10% of the gross national product, with fur back then. So this is the new fur, the new mining possibility, the gold of the late 19th century. Well, of course, World War I, the Russian Civil War, the new Soviet Union, you would expect with the technology of the 20th century and legions of Gulag Zeks, that Siberia would become that El Dorado for the Soviet Union. Yet it still didn't happen. There was a great deal of discussion about when that time was going to come, when Siberia would fund the entire society. Well, here we are in the beginning of the 21st century, and the number of resources available that we know about have even increased. In addition to vast amounts of natural gas, oil shale, for those of you interested in oil shale, coal, timber, iron ore, copper, zinc, lead, palladium, vanadium. It goes into wet strengthened steel, tin, gold, 70% of Russia's gold, silver, and platinum, and a few other things, are waiting to be exploited in Siberia. Russia is first in the world in nickel and palladium production, second in aluminum, platinum, and third in vanadium. These are serious calling cards to anyone, let alone a next-door neighbor, such as China. So what are we going to see as far as exploitation of these resources by the Chinese? Explosion in mining and trade really began in the 21st century, and much of it in the last 5 to 6 years, with indications that the thirst on the Chinese side and willingness on the Russian side is only increasing. In September of 2009, Presidents Medvedev and Hu Jintao signed the Russia-China 2009 to 2018 Cooperation Program, formalizing the creation of a zone of economic development along the Russo-Chinese border. China will build factories on their side, and the Russians will allow massive exploitation of natural resources on the Siberian side. And literally, we could have spent all day long with just going through a list of the mines and the productions created. And I'll just mention a couple just in case you haven't heard of them, or to make the point of how large these movements are. Iron ore is the coming thing for Chinese and Russian exploitation. With Hong Kong money and Russian money, the KNS mine is going on. The Siberian Pacific pipeline is 3,018 miles long, which they began to work on in 2006, is slated to be finished in 2014. So these are the things you would expect, and that we're getting a great deal of material and information on, and a wider range of sources. But you might not realize that 2/3 of China's wood that they use for building comes from Siberia. That's 700,000 rail cars per year. Wood going to China. Water. Minerals are not the soul, or perhaps the future, of the greatest attraction in Siberia for China. China will need drinking water and water for irrigation and hydroelectric power. Currently, in the foreseeable future, these issues can become more critical. Barring water issues tied to survival, hydroelectric power from Siberia can fuel China's economy. Thane Gustafson, now Senior Director of Russian and Caspian Energy, stated last month, March 13th, that China was moving away from coal energy, which now accounts for 80% of its contract to supply China with 100 billion kilowatts of hours of electricity in the following 25 years. In addition to the Russian state contracts, China is working with Russia's largest private energy company, Energo, to supply power from existing and future hydropower in China. These plans are for the Krasnoyarsk. So it's not just the Russian Far East that we're talking about, but eastern Siberia as well. And some of the other mining projects are in western Siberia. But what about people? That's another piece of that puzzle, another list of what the danger might be for China and demographics of the issue. The argument begins with admittedly stark numbers. In the 3 Manchurian provinces south of the Russian Far East, there are 110 million Chinese. Well, whatever concern expressed about the Chinese swarming over the Siberian border, it just hasn't happened. Of the 500,000 Chinese in Russia, most are in European Russia. You might not expect that. Cities like Irkutsk, Khabarovsk, Ulaanbaatar, and Siberia do not have Chinatowns. There are a number of reasons for this. First and last, the Russian government has maintained quite tight border security since 1991. Secondly, outside of Russian state-supported mining and other projects, there are limited venues for individual operations. According to the study of government statistics, Professor Vilya Gelgras, University of Moscow, has determined that the number of Chinese crossing the borders have jumped in the 21st century since 2002. But, again, he's doing a study of these people, asking them, what do you intend to do? They say they want to go home, and the statistics bear that witness. They have gone home. So, is that the whole story? No. In the 1990s, there was concern in some Siberian cities that the Chinese would come in and take their jobs at existing factories. In the 2000s, the migrant workers, mostly involved in building booms, have come from former Central Asian states, such as Kazakhstan, not from China. Chinese have come, but not for factory jobs. Many to most have been involved in retail trade. The obvious role of merchants is yet to result in any real gain in Chinese numbers. Following the breakup of the Soviet Union, Chinese began to trade in the markets in eastern Siberia, especially along the I saw them all on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. They brought in inexpensive, brightly colored clothing, manufactured in China, in the ubiquitous large rectangle plastic bags of the Soviet era. If you've traveled them, that's the level of trade we're talking about here, bringing them in the bags. Today, this level of trade is limited. to increasingly marginalized tent-style shopping areas in medium and larger cities, which are being squeezed out by all this new building. By 2005, the new Russian-owned specialty stores were going up in the old Tsarist era buildings and building of new shopping centers. While the street merchants are generally outshined economically and politically by Chinese entrepreneurs who are building new buildings, buying old factories, and investing in business and manufacturing. So it's not the small merchant and numbers there, but the smaller number, especially in the Russian part. This is Blagoveshchensk, and this is the nicest, largest, newest hotel, and it was put up by Hu Wenyan. And that's the sort of thing for those who follow, those in the Far East are looking at sort of the future role of Chinese in the region, is that they are going to be the entrepreneurs. They're going to build the shopping centers. They're going to build the new hotels. Another aside to this is across the river on the Chinese side, you have these shining new cities with much, much larger numbers. Well, before I get to the Russian population, I'll say one little bit about agriculture, and that is what's happening in the rural areas. Again, in the 1990s, right after the breakup, Chinese came in and rented land, put up glass houses, and started raising vegetables not available in the Siberian stores. You would go months with very, very limited choices of vegetables. This changed with the Chinese farmers who came in. For example, right now, in 2010, Chinese rented 1,054 acres, a little bit larger than the greenhouses of the 1990s, and this is in Birobidzhan. This is just one deal of land rental for agricultural work. If you notice, I've stated these are rental agreements. They're not Okay, so that's the Chinese side. Well, what about the Russian side, the elephant in the room? The relatively small and declining population in Siberia is one issue raised by many observers as being the most determinant in Russian Siberia's future versus Chinese Siberia's future. The Russian Republic lost population with the devolution of the Tsar. Secondly, the Russian Republic itself has a serious demographic situation which has not been corrected on any level and is not being fixed in any way. The 143 million population is small for the amount of territory, but that frankly is not new about small population. Territory. You've got still ongoing declining health and low birth rate. So Siberia, as usual, is not just a canary telling you how bad things are, but is even worse. In the early 1990s, the population was about 20 million. Actually, I've seen official statistics that range somewhere between 20 and 38 million for the region. Today, that number has dwindled to somewhere around 8 to 12 million. Again, contradictory figures, with the majority of those in Siberia living in Western Siberia, not along the border with China. In addition, Siberians are leaving Siberia to go to European Russia. There are better jobs and more jobs. They're also leaving Siberia to go to China for jobs. And that's the Siberians, especially in the Far East. Well, Putin has tried to solve this with a new initiative to lure people back to underpopulated cities and regions. So far, this hasn't had any effect. So, what can we learn about this border region? There actually is the first study being done. Cambridge University began a 3-year project last year in 2012, being directed by Professor Carolyn Humphrey, who knows the region and is an excellent person to lead this. The title of the project is Where Rising Powers Meet, China and Russia and Their North Asian Border. Again, if you're interested in the Russian Far East, already some very interesting articles up on their website about this. Well, so we have all of these polls for China, the possibility of investment, the raw materials ranging from what's underground for mining, what's available for energy, the declining Russian population, the Chinese population right on the border. How can there be any question that this be anything other than a situation where time will take care of it? The Chinese will essentially own everything. It doesn't involve armies at any borders by any means. Well, will Siberia always remain such a pull? No one's mentioned climate change. And if there's a part of the world and of Russia where climate change may very well be the game changer, it's Siberia. Warming has already begun melting of the Siberian permafrost. At this point, the melting will continue. While on the surface, warmer weather in Siberia would appear to be, this could be, as I've had people tell me, both in Mongolia and Siberia, global climate change with warming. Some places, this is not so bad. This is not such a bad thing. But as a matter of fact, what is this going to do? If you understand what permafrost is, and how much it covers all the way down to Lake Baikal, what does this do to all of that investment we're talking about, especially the mining and the existing buildings, the existing towns north of the range of permafrost? One concern that is held right now is that the bogs that will be created will make the existing mining much more expensive, much more difficult. The ability to go in to do more mining will, again, perhaps be problematic as far as building up cities or maintaining the ones, especially up in the Sakha Republic, and that's where we're getting into the diamonds and some of where the gold is. Will this be even more difficult, more pylons that have to be built, more expense built? Not that you can't do it, but it becomes more expensive. And that has always been the trade-off with investment, mining, and this sort of thing in Siberia since the 19th century, is the cost to do business in this place. So who's going to decide if there are human beings around? This is nature. This is being done. Who's going to decide what's going to happen here? What I've focused on, of course, is what the Chinese have done, mining agreements, trade, entrepreneurs, a truck plant here, an iron ore mine there. What does it all add up to? The observers who believe that China has the upper hand in the situation also focus on the demographics, so we've got to bring the demographics back into the issue. But the infrastructure issue is important, and that has been raised peripherally, and I'd like to raise it again. Bridges, roads, and railroads are basic to the development of trade and control of territory. That's an important reason why the Trans-Siberian Railroad was commissioned and built beginning in the 19th century. Good and plentiful roads help in the buildup of population. That will then help with luring population to the region. In turn, schools, hospitals, and theaters are part of turning a trading post into a city. Decisions made by the czarist, going to get back to this, there's a pattern here. Decisions made by the czarist, the Soviet, now the Russian governments have placed the building of that infrastructure behind other priorities. So they don't have 2 centuries of this, which they should have. Withholding of funding has played a determinant role, and that is tied to the fact that decisions were and are made in St. Petersburg and now Moscow. Not locally in Irkutsk gubernia or in the Far Eastern Republic by Vladivostok, Ryan, but in Moscow. And this is a continuing complaint, whether we're talking about Western Siberian governments, Eastern Siberian governments, or city governments, is that they don't have the say in choosing projects or in determining where that wealth goes. Okay, this is it. Better infrastructure would lead to more and better jobs, which would cost them. So maybe keeping some of that money there, control of the profit coming out of these mining projects spent on infrastructure, including bridges. An example recently is the fact that there literally has not been a permanent bridge going over to where major mining is going on right now, and it's the Chinese who are going to build it. The Russians haven't done it. So, as with the suggestion that the Chinese will take Siberia before, or overwhelming entrepreneurship, Russia controls the outcomes on this as well. Russian contracts and how that money is used can be used to shape Siberian Russia, or to ignore the creation of Chinese Russia. That's all their decision is the final one. Greater trade in the There are many European and American and Japanese and South Korean businesses that have invested and will continue to invest in the region. What happens? Time will tell.